Anna Moore, CEO of Domna. We retrofit across the UK. We do about 15,000 homes a year today. We've come to UKREiiF to talk to housing associations, local authorities, and private landlords about how they can upgrade their stock and talk to private capital about how they can find profitable business streams coming out of that. Really, really productive conversations about matching capital to shovel-ready projects. Everybody wants healthy, happy tenants who can live comfortably in their homes, whether those are socially rented or privately rented properties. We know that homes below EPCC are at 73% higher risk of damp and mold, and we spend about £9 billion a year more than we need to on wasted fuel from leaky, drafty homes. And so a lot of the regulatory shifts are trying to solve that. I think government needs to help landlords, especially in the private rental sector, get their heads around what should I actually do to my property? How much is this actually going to cost? So a lot of where we come in advising them through predictive stock assessment outside in, what's actually feasible, where could I qualify for grant, what will the outcome be as a result. And for me, the real message is it's a lot cheaper and easier for most asset owners than they think. When we talk about homes that are below EPCC or not compliant with the Decent Home Standard today, most of those, 85% of them, are EPCDs, where really it's going to cost about £5,000, a lot less than what's mooted in the press. So to me, the message is we've got to do this for social, environmental reasons, and there's a relatively straightforward way to implement. We need to give people good guidance about it. We have this 1.5 million new homes target. I think we all know we're not going to get there through new build development, and nor should we, given that we have 2/3 of that already built. We've got 1 million long-term vacant properties across the UK, and those aren't just properties that people don't want to live in or second homes. They're long-term vacant properties. They're not all tied up in probate courts. In London, the highest density of vacant dwellings is actually in Westminster. So these are places that people want to live, and it would be a heck of a lot cheaper to acquire those through compulsory purchase, at auction, whatever, retrofit them and put them back either into council ownership, reducing some of the £4 million a day we spend on temporary accommodation. Then it would be to build them fully new and a heck of a lot less of embodied carbon. And to me, that's a stroke of pen problem that government can solve. We need to make it easier to do compulsory purchase. We need to make it easier for councils to take possession of those. We were recently having conversations with people working with Bath Council on how do they bring 3,000 to 5,000 new affordable and socially rented properties to market. Well, there's 4,400 long-term vacant properties in the Bath region. If we could make it easier for councils to take possession of those, retrofit them, and put families who need housing into those, it would go a long way. It'd be a lot faster. It'd be a lot cheaper than building. I think there's actually a huge opportunity for private capital to come into existing housing in the UK. We know that properties that are below the minimum energy efficiency standard UK-wide trade at about a 20% valuation discount to those that are above. That's because they're illegal to rent and they need a bit of capex investment. But the uplift that you get on the valuation, in the Midlands, we see 30-40% value improvement post-retrofit on homes. That more than covers the capex that you're spending. And so we see IRR through the stabilization phase, unlevered, of mid to high 20s from portfolio retrofit. People are trying to get into single-family residential. They're all competing for the same stock of house build or new build development. We've got a huge amount of existing property that needs to be aggregated, retrofit, put into portfolios that can be properly managed by larger scale landlords. And we're encouraged by seeing people starting to do that. We're working with a landlord who has 750 single-family private rental properties that they've aggregated in that way. We're working with private equity to do that aggregation and create those portfolios. And there's an enormous return that comes from that level of capital value improvement, in addition to the social value that's created and in addition to the environmental impact. So it's an enormous opportunity. It's potentially £2 trillion of capital value improvement across the UK stock. We actually hosted a roundtable yesterday with several housing associations and with NatWest Lloyd's, who are both involved in the National Wealth Fund, and with PIC, who have historically invested in retrofit, about 70 million pounds that they put into acquiring homes on behalf of Bromley Council to alleviate the need for temporary accommodation. So we're starting to see those projects come through. And I think what's really helpful with the National Wealth Fund is the government-backed guarantee that makes the economics much easier for lenders and investors. We're starting to see that deployed. I think, as with anything in the UK, we can sometimes be a little bit nervous about being the first mover. NatWest have deployed their first tranche of capital and starting to get that off the ground. And so we're quite encouraged that we'll see more of those projects. I think that model works really well and is being deployed well. What we need to see is councils raising their hands to take that funding and housing associations doing the same. And for me, what makes an investable proposition, we've got to either have the capital valuation improvement, and that's a role for real estate private equity, acquire older kit, either that HAs and local authorities are disposing and can't manage, flip it and put it into the market, or we need to have an investable income stream that comes out of some of the retrofit structures, and that's either got to come through bill savings or that's got to come through a comfort charge. I think it would be helpful to see Treasury reconsider their position on that, or it's got to come through structures like the National Wealth Fund, and that's now a proven model that's being deployed. Frankly, I think it's a matter of HAs and local authorities raising their hands. We aren't seeing a green lash, and that's because what we deal with is making homes better for people. Everybody's got to live somewhere, and homes that are drafty, leaky, poorly insulated are more expensive to run, they're unhealthy, they cause respiratory problems. It's an enormous social as well as environmental problem. It's not just about reducing the fifth of carbon emissions that come from home energy use. It's also about making people more comfortable, healthier, and wealthier in the homes that they live in. And most of what we deal with are social housing and affordable, where there's an enormous need and enormous support for the kind of work that we do. We've been heartened by seeing government allocating more funding towards the Warm Homes program, the energy company obligation. We do a lot of work with housing associations to stitch those together and come to good blended funding models. And I think on the private capital side, there's an independent business case, right? This isn't just grant funded. We were speaking a moment ago about the value uplift that you get post-retrofit. On the lowest energy efficient properties, we see 20, 30, 40% capital value improvement post-works. That more than pays for itself, and it's a much higher return, mid to high 20s IRR, than we're seeing on new build single-family residential development, than we see on BTR schemes. It's also a lot lower risk, because on most homes, you take a cavity wall property, we're talking about insulating the cavity, it takes half a day, putting solar panels on the roof. They're low risk investments, and there's a huge pool of stock. We have 19 million homes across the UK below EPCC. It's going to cost 570 billion pounds to upgrade them. It's an enormous market, and we're seeing especially real estate private equity coming into aggregating and retrofitting those properties because the maths just make sense.